Here's where the brackets stand. Now my original plan was to use C-channel with the gusset in it like Dexter does, but it's really not needed because nothing sits on top. So this was cheaper and easier, and it's plenty beefy. It's thicker than the frame of both the axle and the frame of the Airstream, so I have no worries about that. Now I could also put bolts in here and have this bolt onto the axle, but since I'm sure I don't want to remove it, I'm going to weld it on. Most people won't want to do that. That's probably stupid to a lot of you, but it's not stupid to me. It's one less set of bolts to check in a tricky spot, and it's just like having a little bracket added to the axle, just like the axle was a little bit modified. I can still unbolt it and swap out axles at a later date if I want. I just won't be able to take the lift with me unless I cut it off. Anyway, that's today's project, is to get these bolted on, get it all aligned up, and start welding it in, and hopefully by the end of the day, our lift is all together. Trevor's back. He's such a good friend. Trevor brought his motorcycle over. He and some buddies are going on a 10-day backcountry trip on their motorcycles, camping out of their motorcycle, taking all the dirt roads back to Glacier National Park. I'm so excited for him. He's such an adventurer and an explorer. And he built this sweet little rack. I've got fun friends who like to explore and like to work on things and like to modify them as well. Kind of runs in our circle of friends.
It does indeed, yeah.
That looks like so much fun. In another life, I would join him if I had one of those and I didn't have a million projects right now. The Dexter kit comes with all new grade 8 hardware, but I'm just reusing the bolts that were on the Airstream, so I don't need any extra bolts or anything. So I'm going to bolt these on, see how they line up, and see if I can get the axle centered and weld it on. Right now I'm going to mark the center line between the holes and mark the center line on my brackets so that I make sure those line up when I'm aligning this. I don't want to shift the axle forward or back a ½ inch and get the alignment all off. There's my center line. Interesting, that little bracket is shifted over. There's my center of my bracket. And then this will get welded to this. Okay, we've got everything all aligned. We've got our bracket in there bolted in at the highest position. We could still drop it ½ inch if needed. Got our axle here. Now we're going to weld that to that. Not weld it to the frame or it won't be able to be removed ever. So I'm going to run a little bead in there, run it through the little holes, and then it'll be tacked enough that I can drop it and get good welds. Now, one tip about welding on these, someone on Airforms reminded me, thank you, is this is full of rubber for the spring. So you don't want to let the axle tube get hot. So I'm just going to do short little tacks just to get it stuck on there and aligned where I need it. If I move this, it's going to affect the alignment of the trailer, but I got all my alignment marks lined up. We should be good to go. Now I'm going to be grinding off the paint so I can get a good ground for the welder. Point of no return, here we go. Here I'm touching my axle tube to make sure it's still cool, and it is. Since the perch is raised up off the axle tube really doesn't get that hot. Here you can see this is the factory one. Now they've got this lip here, which is really interesting to me. I don't know if this is supporting this tray and that's why they do that, but it's definitely not supporting the axle. I mean, I suppose the frame's underneath that, so if these slipped, it would squish it against the axle, so maybe that's one reason you'd want to run a C-channel, but I'm honestly not worried at all about how I've run this. So that's probably why Dexter does it, because the frame's on the other side of this, and should these fail, it'll still rest on that and be okay. Who knows? Time will tell. Here's the before, and here's the after. That's significant. I hope I can find tires that kind of fill the look of the wheel wells a little bit and don't just look like they're standing way down here on roller skates. That would be bad. Well, Trevor's got to go to work after working with me all day today. Appreciate it, Trevor.
Yeah.
Anybody, thanks. I've got all the tack welds on, everything's all lined up. Now I'm just welding little stitches at a time. I do not want the axle tube to get hot enough to melt the rubber inside, which acts as the spring. So it's taking a little while, but I'm just going about an inch at a time, letting it cool down, coming back when it's not hot. And I'm not letting it get hotter than I can touch anywhere, which is great. Alright, this one's all welded up. It's ready to be wire brushed and then primed and painted and then bolted in. Woo! Taken a little longer than I'd hoped, but it's still faster than waiting the week for the other parts to get shipped and then doing this anyways. And I get a little bit more lift out of it. I get an extra 1.5 inches, which will be kind of fun. Brackets are done, welded, getting ready to be painted. Then we slide them up and bolt them into place. It took most of the day, but I'm happy with how it turned out. Would I do it again the same way? I think so. We'll see in 6 months if anything's moved or gotten loose or anything, but these are beefy bolts. I've got, if you imagine bolting I-beams, which these pretty much are, to your frame like that, it makes a lot of sense that that could handle all the weight. So my only question and concern is, would the C-channel that was touching the frame too, kind of like the factory one, would that be a better safeguard? Yes, for safety that would be better, but I feel just fine with these how they are. I like that I don't have bolts going down that I need to make sure are tight too. The only bolts I have to check are these, and they're easily accessible. Even without jacking it up, I could do it on the side of the road. Alright, I'm torquing these to 140 foot-pounds. Dexter recommends for the number 10 axle between 120 and 155. Beauty. Now I'm working on fishing the propane hardline back there. Our good friend Trout Boy on Air Forums had to run his under the axle, and I refuse to do that because it's just the lowest hanging point. I don't want my propane line hanging down. I want it tucked up and out of the way. So I'll show you how I resolve that in just a sec. That was pretty easy. Even easier than doing brake lines on a car. Go back together nicely. So here you can see the propane line. I was able to just run it right up by the bracket. I'm going to put some sticky zip tie holders on like I use for my solar. Stick them on here and zip tie it to there and it'll be good to go. The one bummer of the C-channel bracket that Dexter sells is you can't get the line through there, which is why Trout Boy ran it under here, but I'm really glad to have it tucked up and out of the way. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to reuse these rivet holes. I'm sure I could drill them out and just re-rivet that in there. I'd love to use screws though. I always prefer screws over rivets. But that's that. That's how the propane's all tucked up and ready to work again. Okay, install's all done. You can see the tanks are no longer the lowest part. Well, they still are, but the axles actually come down slightly lower than the tanks. So I gained 4 inches of ground clearance there. And the valves are way more up in the air. About to throw the wheels on and take it off jack stands, but then I noticed this. My fender here is split, and that lets water get into the inside. So I need to fix this fender before I put it all back together. I'll give you a peek at what this looks like with the wheels on tomorrow when that's all done. It was a long project, but it was fun. It's fun to accomplish it yourself and design it yourself. We'll see how it works in the long term. I saved $100. I probably spent an extra 6 hours building it myself, so that's probably worth $100 to save those 6 hours next time. But I gained an 1.5 inches more lift than the Dexter kit, which is exactly what I wanted. So even if they could have overnighted it to me, it still wouldn't give me the result I wanted. Sometimes you just got to do it yourself. And remember, kids, in order to modify your trailer, you have to modify your trailer. Most things aren't just simple bolt-ons. It's simply go in nice and easy. There's usually some things you need to change.